Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why Everyone Plays. For today, I wanted to go over another veteran of Genshin Impact's lineup, one of the game's earliest 5-star units and likely the first main 5-star DPS for many of us. I'm sure a lot of players have nothing but good things to say about their experiences playing with her, so let's go ahead and talk about everyone's favorite Cocogoat, Ganyu. Before we continue any further, just want to give a shout out to today's sponsor. This video is brought to you by Outplayed once again. It's a video capturing software on Overwolf that works for every popular game such as Genshin. Players love to record and share clips in Genshin all the time, and if you're one of them, you can try this one out. Outplayed automatically captures any interesting highlights during your play or allows you to record manually using a hotkey, which you can then immediately port over to your Discord server or have it uploaded to YouTube, anywhere you feel like sharing. The app has a built-in video editor if you feel like touching it up a bit before sharing, and the best part is that it works for a ton of different games besides Genshin. You can use it for League of Legends, Valorant, Honkai Impact, Rainbow Six Siege, and many more. If you already have Overwolf, then downloading is a very easy process. Should you be interested in using Outplayed, feel free to use the link on screen or in the description. Really simple but cool app that makes recording highlights easier for you. Thanks again to Outplayed for sponsoring the video, but for now, let's get back into it. Ganyu is a well-known character for many reasons, some more obvious than others. What's interesting about her is that she was very misunderstood when she first came out. There was a lot of speculation on if she was overrated or broken, given that initial impressions of her damage were rather positive, but with how the community understood bow users going by Venti, Child, and Fischl as leading examples prior, she presented a contrasting playstyle than what we were used to. Over time though, public opinion of her began to increase favorably, and that would continue to do so as more units were released and subsequently new team compositions were discovered. Fast forward a year and a half later, she remains a perennial top tier for most people. Besides her spectacular prowess in combat, a lot of Ganyu's widespread use, especially during 2021, had to do with being the first all-purpose 5-star DPS in Genshin. Before her, we had Albedo, Child, Klee, and Venti, strong units in their own right, but their value was either not fully discovered at the time, or they were too specific in usage to see universal representation. Ganyu was part of the Liyue DPS trio that came out during the beginning of 2021, the other two being Xiao and Hu Tao. Ever since their releases, the player base started to delve deeper into optimization of parties, different combinations, and strategies. Essentially, this was when the quote-unquote meta really entered the public consciousness. Being the first of the three, along with having a meaningful supporting role in the Liyue portion of the art conquest, there was a lot of excitement for Ganyu. Said excitement was further amplified through her personality and appearance, which is a lot more to do with the character's initial popularity than you would think. For a comparison, Klee's first appearance way back in version 1.0 still remains in the top 10 best-selling banners of all time as of August 1st if we go by the App Store data in the Chinese App Store. Mind you, there's likely a difference in character appeal between the East and West, but it's still worth referencing. I assure you, Klee's commercial success was not due to her strength as a playable unit. We all know why. Her trailer was one of the most adorable things the Genshin community has ever seen. Zhongli's demo is the second most viewed video on Genshin's English channel, and it wouldn't be a stretch to say he's arguably the most popular male character in Genshin, explaining why the player base was so disappointed by his underwhelming power afterwards. The performative failings of Klee and Zhongli, if we want to call it that, despite their marketable appeal, is what would separate the player's experiences with Ganyu from them. As trite and superficial as it sounds, Ganyu is a very attractive character by most people's standards, and while that isn't enough to make for a popular unit, it's certainly important for getting people's eyes on you, literally. To maintain that presence afterwards, you then have to be useful. As much as a lot of you argue waifu or husbando over meta, to which I agree, there is a significant degree of influence their actual strength has on whether or not the average player integrates them into their roster and invests time and resources on them. Were that not the case, Bennett would not be anywhere near as popular as he is now. I say all this because when it comes to anime games in particular, the waifu husbando phenomenon can be seen as the fire, while the in-game performance is like the wood. To an extent, you need to have some semblance of both for a character to be popular on release, and Ganyu most certainly was. She was, and still is, one of Genshin's most beloved characters, giving her constant exposure and thus curiosity in trying her out, leading to the second part of her runaway success. She filled in something that Genshin was sorely lacking at the time. As stated before, what Genshin was missing during her release was an accessible all-purpose DPS unit. Of the original 5 stars, only Diluc and Keqing were main DPS, and if we're splitting hairs, as much as it burns my tongue to say it, Diluc was really the only one who could be considered all-purpose. Venti, Klee, Child, Zhongli, and Albedo were also considered niche. Of course, now everyone is fully aware of how strong Child is, but back then it wasn't apparent right out the gate since he was missing his personal weapon and Xiangling's full potential was yet to be discovered. In Ganyu's case, she was a character everyone could get behind and understand very quickly. Her shining virtue is, of course, her unparalleled consistency and versatility, courtesy of her talents, which in retrospect were extremely overpowered given her release date. A major weakness surrounding bow users is that they had no way to handle multiple enemies at once outside of their elemental skill and burst. Ganyu would be the first to circumvent this issue thanks to her Frostflake arrows, not only having immense damage scaling, but also striking multiple enemies on contact, dealing even more damage. A great quality of life aspect was that it would bloom even when hitting terrain, allowing her to still get the follow-up damage even if she missed the initial arrow. From this alone, there was a noticeable difference in overall damage and clear speed between Ganyu and the other DPS bow users, Child and Fischl. The former was only able to damage multiple enemies for a set period of time and was also not in many players' lineups, while the latter suffered from the aforementioned lack of area coverage. If we compare Fischl and Ganyu side by side based on the knowledge the average player had on Genshin Impact back in January 2021, it was easy for Ganyu to be seen as a direct upgrade to Fischl. The prevailing narrative of Electro being the weakest offensive element was starting to circulate as well, coupled by the aforementioned lack of a bow user with area coverage and the lack of an all-purpose DPS character. Circumstantially, Ganyu was a valuable addition to any player's roster, no matter what 5 stars you had prior if you had none of them or all of them. Her relevance has been persisting this entire time, even after the Cryo element has witnessed more additions to its lineup. Ayaka's opening debut raised a few questions regarding if she would supersede Ganyu, but it was made very clear early on the two occupied different roles despite being part of the same element. Ayaka was for front-loaded burst, whereas Ganyu was for, once again, consistency. Now would be a good time to start going through her abilities, though I'm sure everyone knows what she does at this point. What helps her achieve such a high level of consistency is that she's able to do everything on her own, with or without external support. It's not necessarily a bad thing for a character to require assistance from the rest of their team. That's kind of the whole point of Genshin Impact's gameplay in the first place. That said, it lowers their consistency since they won't feel as comfortable to play without them. Ganyu's Frostflake arrow covers a large area on explosion, but she has trailered the Chillian, addressing two things that make her gameplay feel less stifling than other archers. First, it's a decoy summon, taunting enemies into going after it instead of her. This makes it easier for her to corral everyone in a tight spot for easy shots. Not nearly as effective as, say, Venti's ultimate, but it gets the job done nonetheless. One other thing is that it draws attention away from her, which is important considering her aim shot takes a second and change to load up. Aim shot has always been a fickle problem for bow users. Taking at least a second to charge up means you have to somehow find a way to keep enemies from attacking you with anything that causes you to stagger, and the usual way other titles achieve this is not possible in Genshin barring co-op. You can only ever have one unit on the field at any given moment, so any semblance of drawing aggro is unfeasible through conventional means. Ganyu's elemental skill is the perfect tool to give to someone like her, especially when you take Celestial Shower into account. Persistent cryo damage to all enemies in a wide area for an extended period of time. And to my knowledge, it's one of the only elemental bursts in the game with permanent uptime, bearing a 15-second cooldown with a duration of the same length, and a modest energy cost of 60 at that. It's nowhere near as rapid as the raw shredding capability of Ayaka's Blizzard, but given that it drops up to 50 icicles over the duration, at level 10 it means Ganyu's elemental burst has the potential to dish out over 6,000% in collective damage, putting it on par with Ayaka's if the conditions are right. Her decoy also plays a critical part in maximizing the effectiveness of every Celestial Shower by keeping enemies within the zone as long as possible on top of drawing aggro. Putting it all together, Ganyu's a bow user who excels in single target and multi-target situations alike. Thanks to her extremely low cooldowns and Frostlake arrows, there's never a moment where her damage falls off, unlike other strong damage dealers like Hu Tao, Ayaka, and Shogun. She essentially guarantees a consistent result every time, and while you'll probably never see her pull off one of those million damage screenshots that every Eula main in existence is gassing their copium with, you can rely on her to do what needs to be done. That's the prevailing reason behind why so many people use Ganyu to this day. She's dependable, fitting considering her role as the secretary of the Qixing, and her inexplicable capacity to do the work of 3 people by herself. Another core part of her popularity comes from her synergistic design. Out of every cryo unit in the game, and there are a lot of them, Ganyu is the best at achieving anything cryo-related, with the exception of Superconduct. If you want a chain freeze, there's an entire team composition based on abusing Ganyu's persistent application. It's more effective against multiple enemies because if they're close together you get more icicles hitting the same target, thus ensuring more freeze. Against one enemy it may not be as effective as, say, Ayaka's freeze. It's still very consistent though, more so if you attach another cryo unit and you are likely going to do that anyway. You can also use her for melt reactions by way of her Frostflake arrow. On paper it counts as 2 hits, but for the sake of elemental reactions, both the initial arrow and the bloom will apply melt. Alternatively, if you want her as a sub DPS, in order to get the double damage melt rather than 1.5, Ganyu is once again able to perform that with Celestial Shower, where the slow rate of fire actually works in your favor, letting you time your reactions more precisely. Regardless of what purpose you have for her, she sets up your team without intruding on anyone else's rotations. The best way to ensure a character's longevity is by being able to occupy multiple slots in theory. Someone like Yoimiya sees comparatively less play because she can only be a main DPS, but that pits her against Xiangling and Hu Tao, 2 of the strongest damage dealers in the game. Now that's not to say she can't deal her fair share of damage, cause No, she certainly can. But when you think about a typical, say, Spiral Abyss scenario and you're in need of 2 fire teams, kind of like the ones we had in 2.9, unless you have a personal attachment towards Yoimiya like a certain somebody I know, Xiangling and Hu Tao feel like the more obvious choices, especially if you're considering pulling for her. Yoimiya is a strong character, but ultimately not a must-have in that sense. Ganyu manages to withstand the test of time by being as inconspicuous as possible, true to how little attention she draws to herself in the game's lore. While a lot of her damage stems from her Frost-like arrows, enough of her power budget is associated with her skill and burst that she's able to reliably double as a sub-DPS, though it may require some more investment, and there are a few things that attest to this. Among her persistent abilities, Harmony between Heaven and Earth is one of them. While Celestial Shower is active, she gives 20% bonus cryo damage to anyone within the area, so you can run Ayaka and Ganyu in the same party. Personally, I think Ayaka and Shunghe are more efficient, but to each their own. Anyways, Constellation 1 decreases enemy cryo resistance by 15% when using a Frost-like arrow. Constellation 2 grants an additional charge of her elemental skill, letting you have a flower up virtually all the time. And if you're daring enough to unlock her Constellation 4, Celestial Shower debuffs all enemies with a bonus damage amplifier of up to 25%. Granted, all of these things are intended to be utilized by mostly Ganyu, but because of how they were designed, they can still work while she's off-field, everything besides C1, but that can be addressed by switching to her, shooting a Frost-like arrow, then going back to whoever your main carry is. It's this flexibility that also allowed Ganyu to survive in relevance even after the long-awaited and heavily anticipated introduction of Ayaka, a playable unit during Genshin's beta test. Were she unable to do the things that she does, and to that extent, she may not have been able to hold that position. True, you technically need 2 parties for Spiral Abyss, so having a second cryo main DPS doesn't affect the first. However, it helps a lot that Ganyu can be fielded as a backup damage dealer. On occasion, I find myself running Ayaka and Ganyu together whenever the first chamber has a lot of enemies spread out on the floor, but I still need damage against a single target for the second and third chamber. I'm starting to think a character's relevance has more to do with if their elemental skill and burst can hold even after they swap out. If Celestial Shower wasn't a lasting effect, she wouldn't be nearly as popular as she is now. That's really the name of the game for popular characters, flexibility. Zhongli, Kazuha, Shogun, Bennett, and now Ganyu. What they have that most of the Wino and Place characters don't, aside from being stronger overall, is that they can work in a lot of situations. Even if you don't have a personal attachment to the character, the fact that you can use them for regular world exploration, bossing, or artifact domains is enough for players to subconsciously use them without a second thought. I'll make no mistake, Ganyu is a very well-beloved character, but at the end of the day, in-game usage takes precedence, just like a Kazuha. Hardly anyone gave him any attention in his debut, but after seeing what they missed out on both in his gameplay and personality, the entire community was feverishly begging Hoyo to release his rerun. Likewise, there's hardly any situation where Ganyu isn't useful. Now, with the release date of this video being set for August 13th and version 3.0 having an expected release date later this month, there's bound to be a lot of changes in character usage, especially for Hydro and Electro. But in spite of that, I don't really see anyone like Ganyu falling out of relevance, not unless Dendro reactions or units are so ridiculously overtuned that they overshadow all existing characters. There is a slight possibility of that happening considering 5 stars originating from Inazuma are noticeably stronger than those from Liyue or Mondstadt. But be that as it may, Ganyu survived a wave of 5 stars from one new region, and there's a strong chance she can do it again. She's very easy to gear up in terms of weaponry, and if you go 4-piece Blizzard Strayer on her along with Cryo Resonance, you can achieve max crit rate on her with only 25% base crit. Since the artifacts give her 40%, her own passive talent gives her 20, and the Cryo Resonance gives 15, it's very easy to max out her crit. Case in point, she's easy to use, and ease of access can sometimes hold more equity than top strength. There will come a time when Ganyu eventually gets power crept, but I don't see it happening for years to come. If anything, she might survive longer than those who came after her. She does a fantastic job against single targets and even better against multi-targets. Her Chain Freeze combo is the most brain-dead win condition in existence, and if push comes to shove, you can designate her as a secondary damage dealer. There's no other way I can describe Ganyu's playstyle besides jack of all trades, master of everything. But we all know the reason why everyone plays her. That one story during the Archon War when she choked a giant monster to death when they tried to swallow her because they, and I quote, fatally underestimated how wide her waistline was.
Lump she was back then. Why, when she stumbled while we ascended the mountain, she would roll down to the bottom like a little ball.
If you guys enjoyed the video, I would very much appreciate it if you left a like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter for cursed tweets, joining my Discord server, and checking out my previous Why Everyone Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.